I wanted to take a moment to talk about Islam Makhachev's comments on women's MMA. I mean, I'm sure everyone has already seen this, so I'm going to give my thoughts. Some of you will agree, some of you won't agree, but here we go. People are making too big a deal about this, and I'm going to tell you why. More specifically, for one, I think people are projecting a lot of views on Islam, which he didn't necessarily mean. And secondly, I think people are not looking at this with any kind of perspective. So anyway, I mean, obviously, you know, he tweeted this after the co-main event of UFC 248, Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Zhang Weili. It was a fight that many people enjoyed, a lot of action, and a lot of damage. It's kind of, we all saw the hematoma on Joanna's forehead, rather graphic. And he tweeted out, which he has since deleted, "This is not a woman's sport." So there was heavy backlash to these comments. A lot of people saying he's backwards, he's a misogynist, etc., etc. And if you want to say this, then that's your right. I think the issue is you need to be consistent in how you apply this. The UFC is basically a monopoly. The reason why a lot of more casual observers can sometimes not understand the distinction between MMA, the sport, and UFC, the promotion, is precisely because of this monopoly. And women's MMA in the UFC is very new. Okay? The first women's UFC fights were in 2013. So that's 7 years ago. That's not a long time ago. In 2011, Dana White was asked whether the UFC would introduce any women's divisions, and he said never. And many fighters have a general opposition to women's fighting, including George St. Pierre.
Me personally, I have a hard time watching the girl fight. It's the way I grew up, maybe it's mentality, I'm different, I'm old school, but I have a hard time watching girl fighting, it's hard for me.
And Fedor.
Do you like women's MMA?
Вы любите женский ММА?
No.
These are not obscure figures. These are legends of the sport. Were they ever on the receiving end of this level of backlash? They were not. So if you want to condemn Islam Makhachev, you need to be consistent. Give the same level of venom that you're giving him to these other guys. And I can't help but think there's a certain level of projection of certain views on him because of his background, because he's from the Northern Caucasus, because of the culture they have. We all remember, well, some of us remember, the threads on ShareDog and on Reddit about the lack of pictures of women on Khabib's Instagram. Like, mind your own business. What does that have to do with anything? But there is a certain lack of understanding of that culture among many fans, even though their athletes are performing at the highest levels of the sport. And then there's the reply of Mr. Conor McGregor, who said, "An absolute cretin, a convicted steroid cheat that will do anything to avoid impact and stall a fight," and then talks down on one of the greatest exchanges of combat ever produced by our female combatants. "These little gremlins. It's back on. Filthy rats. Shame on the game." End quote. So, aside from the accusations, the steroid accusations, of which Islam was cleared, and calling Dagestani fighters little gremlins, filthy rats, etc., this is a game he's been playing for quite some time. Conor McGregor is kind of the inheritor of Chael Sonnen in using, let's be honest, xenophobic language to promote fights. Whatever you want to think about that. He's now playing the role of the woke activist type, and yet in the lead up to UFC 194, he said of Jose Aldo, and I quote, "If this was a different time, I would invade his favela on horseback and would kill anyone who wasn't fit to work." So he's someone who says things about killing and enslaving people, but he wants to make a moral condemnation of Islam Makhachev's opinion on women's MMA. It doesn't make sense. Conor is not woke. He made indefensible statements. And I'm going to end with, a statement of Frank Mir. Younger fans might not remember him. Those who've been following the sport for many years do. He is currently working as a commentator for the Russian promotion Absolute Championship Akhmat, which is based in Grozny, Chechnya, the Chechen Republic. And ACA does not have women's divisions. And Mir was asked about this, and I couldn't find the exact quote, but he said something to the effect of, well, they have a different culture, they consider it disrespectful that two women would beat each other to death while men watch them. And that's why I think this is ultimately a matter of Islam made a very simple statement. A lot of people projected particular views. A lot of people projected a particular worldview on that statement, which may or may not have applied to it, and kind of ran with it. Islam said this is not a women's sport. Does that mean he thinks female MMA fighters are incapable fighters? Not necessarily. It could very well have been in reaction to Joanna's grotesque injury, and sort of a reaction of, well, why should women be doing this for the entertainment of men? Which is similar to what GSP said. So, whether you agree with Islam, whether you don't agree with Islam, don't project a whole worldview on it. Don't blow it out of proportion. He's expressing an opinion. It may be different than yours. He's not a citizen of the United States. I doubt he has any desire or ability to influence the laws or even the culture of the United States. He's just expressing an opinion. If you want to disagree, that's fine. If you want to make these grand moral condemnations, I really hope you weren't laughing when Conor McGregor talked about enslaving the people of Jose Aldo's favela. That's all.